Thanks for inviting me to discuss leadership and the importance of character of the Union officers and Mead featured in my historical novel, Without Warning. A little bit about myself. I was the commanding officer of the USS Whidbey Island LSD 41, and during my 30-year Navy career, I was Chief of Staff of Amphibious Forces 7th Fleet as a speechwriter for Admiral Boredom, and then I followed on by being director of the Air Force Academy Center of Innovation. The Whidbey Island is a landing ship dock. It's about 610 feet long, 16,000 ton. Mission is for amphibious assaults. So we sink the back of the ship down, and out comes the tanks and the LCACs, and we can land helicopters and those sort of things. Total crew is about 1,500 Navy, 500 Marines. The next slide, you'll see that Without Warning, when I wrote it, I wanted to write it as the flip side of Michael Shera's Killer Angels. And I was at Marine Corps Command and Staff College, as a lieutenant commander. We all had to read Killer Angels. And then we went up to Gettysburg for a 2-day field ride, and we basically followed the Confederate movements. When I was commanding officer of the Whidbey Island, I was very interested in, well, what about the guys who won the battle, General Mead and his subordinates? So I started doing a little bit of research and focusing on the Union officers and the men who led them. It started out as a small project, I thought, but over 10 years of research and writing, I finally finished Without Warning. Like many of you, I already knew a good deal about the battle from the prior visits to the battlefield and my reading. I knew quite a bit about the strategy and troop movements, especially from the Confederate side. What I was really interested in is learning more about the participants, both the officers and soldiers, especially from the Union side. What was their personality, leadership style, and character? I wanted to learn more about these men and see if there was a correlation between their character and how they behaved when they encountered without warning moments. Much of my research was focused on a deep dive into primary sources, their personal letters, after-action reports, memoirs, to really get to know them, and their inner thoughts and how they were perceived by others who knew them. Once I gathered as much information I could find each of the characters, I eventually found the way into the book. I then spent several days with a retired military psychiatrist to dive deeper into each of my findings about the detailed psychological profile of each character. The next slide you'll see is how do we know if someone is fit to take command? And second question I was really interested in is, what do we know about this person's character? So when I took command of the Whidbey Island on board, I showed up one day and I was the commanding officer, and on Monday, I got the ship underway. I didn't know anybody, but I trusted everybody had character and they would kind of follow the rules and customs of the Navy. But that was like General Meade when he took over the command of the Union Army. He didn't know a lot of the senior people, and he didn't know hardly anybody on his staff. So the two important questions I was interested in is, character, in my opinion, is the heart and soul of leadership. So what were the characters of the different Union participants we're going to look at today at the Battle of Gettysburg? The next slide, you'll see that discussion will focus on the character and leadership of 6 different Union officers at the Battle of Gettysburg. We'll be exploring each officer's without warning moments and how their character and leadership impacted their decision under pressure. All the dialogue in the book and in my examples are directly quoted from primary sources or are carefully constructed paraphrases. The next slide, you'll see definition of leadership. I said, so let's start with the definition of leadership. Leadership is the art of getting things done through people to achieve a desired effect. You can see in the next slide, there's a lot of different styles of leadership. Using a Navy analogy, leadership styles are like different types of watercraft. There's no good or bad style. The appropriateness of the style is always situational. Great leaders are known for being able to demonstrate style versatility based on the individual and the situation they face. The next slide, we're going to look a little bit about character. Unlike leadership, which can be described as a variety of styles, character is a series of qualities. Think of character as a moral compass. The next slide, you'll see character is a collection of the inner qualities that make up a person. Good character is described, typically when you go to someone's eulogy, they'll talk about the person's character. Those qualities you can see: physical, moral courage, honesty, kindness, justice, empathy, decisiveness, resilience. And on the poor character side, you'll see lying, cheating, justice, murdering, selfishness, conceit, etc. So the next slide, we're going to talk about how does character influence leadership? Leadership without character is like a ship underway without a rudder. It is on its way, but is directionless and headed for disaster. The same can be said for an individual or an organization with questionable character. They are due for problems, usually tested during a without warning moment. So why is it so hard to determine someone's character, especially when you first meet them? Because character, like a rudder, is hidden below the waterline. It's not easily seen. It's only when you get to know the person and see them behave under different circumstances that true character is revealed. As we will soon see, this is the challenge that Meade faced upon assuming command. Which of his generals had good character and which did not? What is a without warning moment? It's the pause between disbelief and fear when an unexpected event occurs. We all have had these without warning moments. The low tire pressure light comes on when you're driving and you're late for a meeting. You get into an automobile accident. Your doctor tells you have cancer. You find out that a loved one has died unexpectedly. What do? You don't have time to join a character or leadership workshop or read a book about character. You react with the character you have at that moment. That's why it's so critical at our military academies. We emphasize character to a great degree. Without warning responses. When a without warning moment presents itself, how do you react is often dependent upon your character. You can't deny it. Hey, no, I don't want this. You can view it as just another challenge to be overcome, or you can begin immediately to consider what you will do to act. This may require a rudder change, which is character. Each of the 6 officers we'll be discussing today experienced their own without warning moment before and during the Battle of Gettysburg. Each of them is a leader of character, most of good character, one without good character. In addition to examining the character and leadership of these 6 Union officers at Gettysburg, we will also talk about their individual without warning moments and how their character influenced how they met the challenge. We will follow these officers at different points during the 3-day battle and from one end of the battlefield to the other. So let's start with General George Gordon Meade. If you asked him to describe himself, he would admit that he was not the most charismatic man, and even felt that he lacked charisma was a disqualifying reason for him to lead the Army of the Potomac. He felt this way because he was about to meet arguably one of the most charismatic leaders of the war, Robert E. Lee, on the battlefield. At West Point, Robert E. Lee was a senior when General Meade was a freshman at West Point. So Meade was very familiar with Robert E. Lee, who never got any demerits at West Point. Meade managed to accumulate a few. Meade also might describe himself, besides being a West Point graduate, he was fluent in French, careful planner, an engineer, and a lighthouse builder. Others will tell you that he was a damned old Google-eyed snapping turtle because of his tremendous temper. They would say that he was a sound decision maker, brave, that he led from the front, and he hated reporters and politicians equally. In the next slide, I'm talking about his character. He was a Philadelphia gentleman born into a prominent family. He was reserved, modest, and unassuming. Cool under fire, after being wounded twice at Glendale, he was back leading his brigade 8 weeks later. One of the bullets that hit him in Glendale went through his right side, through his lung, just missed his spinal cord and came back. And amazingly, he was back out on the battlefield 8 weeks later. As you can imagine, during the Battle of Gettysburg, Meade faced many without warning moments. Let's look at a few of the most challenging. Let's set the scene. It's June 28th, 1863. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. He's camped about 2 miles from General Hooker's headquarters in Frederick, Maryland. It's 3 days before the start of the battle. Meade is asleep in his tent. Prior to retiring, Meade is concerned that he has not received any plans from General Hooker commander of the Army of the Potomac, on stopping Lee's march into Pennsylvania. Meade is also worried that Hooker will have him arrested for an altercation, a verbal altercation that they had regarding Hooker's poor performance at the Battle of Chancellorsville just 6 weeks earlier. Meade is awakened by a touch on his shoulder. He doesn't have his thick glasses on, and he looks out in a kind of a glazy look and sees the figure of Colonel James Hardee, President Lincoln's messenger, standing before him in civilian clothes. And remember, Hardee had fired 3 generals before this in 1 year, so Meade kind of knew maybe why Hardee was in his tent. Meade is disoriented from being woken up from a sound sleep and assumes the worst after Hardee says, "General Meade, I've come to bring you trouble," and hands General Meade a packet from the president with an order telling him to assume the command of the Army of the Potomac. This is the ultimate without warning moment on the Union side for the Battle of Gettysburg. How does Meade respond? Thinking he is about to be arrested, he says he has a clear conscience, is prepared to face charges. Next, he goes into disbelief, denial, and fear. This is typical pattern for anyone experiencing a without warning moment. He reached Meade's President Lincoln's order 3 times, assigning him to head the Army of the Potomac. Then he reached General Halleck's letter, giving him further directions. Finally, due to his character, strong responsibility, and a sense of duty, he moves to acceptance and begins making plans to carry out this unexpected and unwanted order. He says, "Well, I've been tried and condemned. I suppose I shall have to march to the execution in a dignified manner as I can muster." He and Hardee go to relieve Hooker, and they arrive at 6 a.m. at Hooker's headquarters, and at 7 o'clock, 1 hour later, he verbally assumes command of the Army of the Potomac. The written signed orders for the relief take place about 5 o'clock that evening. He's the 4th commander in 1 year for the Army of the Potomac, and he knows if he loses the battle, he'll be fired immediately. I'm going to say a little bit about my without warning moment. Assuming command of the Whidbey Island on a Friday, the admiral ordered me to get the ship underway on a Monday. Again, I don't know anybody, just like General Meade hardly knew anyone on the staff. He didn't know a lot of the people as corps commanders that closely. There was a squall that morning, on Monday morning. Thugs were there pulling, the lines were really tight. The ship went out in the middle, 2 football fields long, coming out, and we got caught in a crosswind. We were about 40 to 50 feet from going aground, which if we did, I would have been fired. And we're sitting there, and as we're going out, I had my true without warning moment. How did I handle it? I was scared. I kept my mouth shut, but like most commanding officers I had served before for about 20 years, I never knew what they were thinking when they kept their mouths shut, but I was scared, just like Meade was scared. We got underway, we made it through, and we went out into the ocean and started doing our operations. But here's the key. I didn't have time to analyze or figure out everyone's character. I just had to assume they did have character and would do what I told them to do. This is not the case with General Meade. He's going to face with one particular person we'll talk about later. We're going to talk about Meade's second without warning moment. The next without warning moment Meade faces comes just a few days later on July 1st, the first day of the battle. This may be the mother of all without warning moments, a triple kick to the gut. How Meade reacts is arguably the key to the ultimate outcome of the Battle of Gettysburg. Meade is in Taneytown, Maryland, approximately 12 miles south of Gettysburg, when he learns that General Reynolds has been killed. General Oliver has assumed command of his own 11th Corps and Reynolds' 1st Corps. And that may be, Howard may be facing 2 of Lee's corps of the Army of the Northern Virginia. This is a classic bad day at the office and a monumental without warning moment for Meade. Losing Reynolds this early in the battle is a major blow because of what we know of Reynolds and his character. He was a fellow Pennsylvanian, former commandant of West Point, one of the most highly respected generals in either army and a close and trusted friend of Meade. In fact, Meade felt so strongly that Reynolds, rather than himself, should be selected to command the Army of the Potomac. Although unknown to Meade, Reynolds had been offered command by President Lincoln, but turned it down. What about Howard and his character? Howard was twice wounded, his arm amputated at the Battle of Fair Oaks. He was an ardent abolitionist, and after the war founded Howard University. But Howard had a poor reputation as a commander due to his poor performance at Chancellorsville and during the early fighting on the first day of Gettysburg, where again his corps found themselves retreating through the town of Gettysburg, ultimately ending up on Cemetery Hill. So Meade is faced with several critical decisions on July 1st, right around noon. Howard is commanding the troops, two corps up in Gettysburg. He's facing two or three of Lee's corps. And he knows that Howard does not know the Pipe Creek plan that showed for retreat from Gettysburg if they were overrun up there. So first and foremost, Meade has to decide whether he's going to fight a battle at Gettysburg or reposition the army on the ground of his choosing based on the contingency plan he developed late that night before known as Pipe Creek Circular. However, the Pipe Creek Circular plan was still being distributed to his corps commanders, and it was not yet known to Howard. Secondly, he must make the decision to personally go to Gettysburg or stay in Taneytown, closer to Pipe Creek, should the ground and the situation at Gettysburg prove disadvantaged. Rather than move himself to Gettysburg and risk being in the wrong spot to command, he orders General Winfield Scott Hancock, the highly trusted commander of Second Corps, to Gettysburg to survey the ground, and while there relieve Howard, who outranks him, and take command of the First and 11th Corps. As we shall see shortly, this last decision will be will test the character of both Howard and Hancock, and become Hancock's without warning moment. General Hancock. Let's dive into the leadership and character of General Hancock. West Point class 1844, physically tall and handsome, called Hancock the Superb, excellent tactician, born leader, highly trusted by Meade, and had an unsuccessful run for president in 1880. His character is considered a gentleman, courageous, had affinity towards volunteers, commanding voice, and he's probably ranked as one of the top three preferred swearers in the Union Army for the officers. What is Hancock's without warning moment? Begins as he is ordered by Meade at 1 p.m. on July 1st to ride to Gettysburg, survey the ground, and assume command over the 1st and 11th Corps, currently being led by General Oliver, who is his senior. Unknown to Howard, Hancock learns prior to his departure for Gettysburg that President Lincoln has given General Meade unprecedented permission to forego normal military custom and promote without regard to rank and seniority. In other words, juniors could be promoted over seniors. It's the only time during the war where Lincoln allowed this to happen, and was at Gettysburg, and it proved to be very fortuitous. As Hancock arrives on the field at 4:20 p.m., he observes Union forces retreating through the town, and as one of his aides described later, quote, wreck, disaster, disorder, almost panic that precedes disorganization, defeat, and retreat were everywhere. Hancock finds Howard on Cemetery Hill and tells him that Meade has ordered him to take overall command of all forces of Gettysburg. What do you think Howard's reaction to this order was? Howard's reaction to this order was as you would expect. Quote, you have no authority, General Hancock, to relieve me of my command. I'm the senior officer. You have no damn idea what is going on. Hancock counters by telling Meade he has written orders from Meade in his pocket, and I will show you. Howard says, no. I trust that you have those orders. You can still not take command. I'm senior. At this point, both men are furious, yet holding back their anger as best they could as the rebels are chasing the Union guys through the streets of Gettysburg. It was clear that the Union forces were in a perilous situation. They were vulnerable, clinging to the highly desirable position on Cemetery Hill, but they needed to stop the retreat of their panicked soldiers immediately. Here's where Hancock and Howard's character comes through. Rather than continuing and escalating the argument at this critical moment, Hancock says, quote, very well, General Howard. I am now in command of the forces of Gettysburg and have assumed responsibility for their conduct and the safety of all Gettysburg forces until General Slocum, who outranks both Howard and Hancock, arrives. I will second any order that you give, but General Meade has also directed me to select a field of battle on which to fight, either here or at Pipes Creek. Hancock then told Howard that based on what he saw, Gettysburg appeared to be a very good ground to do battle. Howard agreed and answered with, quote, "Very well, sir. I select this as the battlefield." And together, they continue to rally the retreating soldiers and deploy their forces in a defense posture around Cemetery Hill. Hancock seconds Howard and saying, "Yes, and I picked this as the battlefield as well." Now, think for a moment how this counter might have ended or affected the outcome of July 1st and ultimately the entire battle had these two men had lesser character and were tasked with navigating this challenging scenario. Let's look at General Sickles. Thus far, we have focused on the leadership, character, and without warnings of true men of character. Now let's take a look at my favorite scoundrel, General Daniel Sickles. Congressman from New York. He has Tammany Hall links. He's a political general, not a professional soldier, no former military training, a skilled lawyer, extremely bright, Third Corps commander. He's there because Lincoln appointed him because he's a Northern Democrat. And they don't have a lot of Democrats in the senior ranks of the Union Army that are politicians. Let's look at his character. General Dan Sickles was a close associate of the former commander of the Armored Army, Joseph Hooker. He was known to be personally courageous and performed well at the Battle of Chancellorsville. He was a heavy drinker. He's a womanizer, and he also shot his wife's lover. He was acquitted on the first temporary insanity defense, and his lawyer was Stanton, who later became Secretary of War. This ruined his political career, but the war provided an opportunity for him to redeem his reputation. He didn't really care if he lived or died in this battle. If he got killed, he would die as a hero. If he wins, he would also be a hero because he was there trying to reclaim his tarnished character. He was also a narcissist, he's miracle and vain. So what could possibly go wrong with a General Sickles commanding Third Corps of 11,000 men being asked to hold the left flank of the entire army? So let's look at Sickles' without warning moment. And it's one of the greatest controversies of the Battle of Gettysburg from the Union side. At 6:30 a.m. the morning of July 2nd, a courier, there was a map tracing from Mead showing the defensive line along Cemetery Ridge and telling Sickles to extend his line to the left, Hancock's Second Corps, and occupy Little Round Top, defending the entire Union left flank. Sickles is asleep in his tent, and the map and orders are delivered to his aide. At 8 a.m., Mead sent his son, Captain George Mead Jr., to tell Sickles that his headquarters at the Lester House and to ask Sickles if his Third Corps is in position. When young Mead arrives, he is told that Sickles is still asleep and that Third Corps is not in a place because they are confused about where they should go because General Gary's troops appeared to be encamped in a general area that Sickles' Corps was relieving and not specifically in a line of battle. Mead Jr. asked Sickles if he received the map tracing and was told that was left with an aide as Sickles was asleep at the time. However, Sickles was still unsure of where to deploy his forces. At 8:45, Captain Mead arrives back at the Lester House, where his dad is surrounded by a lot of other generals and tells his dad that Sickles' Corps is not in place and that he is unsure of where to deploy. As expected, General Mead explodes that Sickles has been twice told where his corps should be, once directly that evening before and earlier that morning with the delivery of the map tracing. He orders his son to go back, tell Sickles, and tell him to occupy Little Round Top. At 9 a.m., Captain Mead returns to Sickles' camp, tells him to extend his line to Little Round Top. Sickles dismissively replies that his troops are moving and will soon be in position shortly. However, before curtly dismissing the young captain, he remarks that he believes General Gary's Corps was not in a specific position the evening before. At this point, having been on the receiving point of his father's famous temper on many occasions, growing up as a kid, how do you think Captain Mead is feeling about reporting the results of his encounter with Sickles to his father? 9:45 a.m., Mead Jr. arrives back at Mead's headquarters, conveys to his father that he told Sickles to occupy Little Round Top, and that he was told that Third Corps was on the move and that Sickles was going to survey the terrain he'd been asked to occupy. However, probably to escape his father's wrath, Mead Jr. neglects to mention that Sickles was still confused based on the position of Gary's troops the previous evening. In the meantime, while Sickles was surveying the terrain, he decides that he doesn't like the ground he was assigned on Cemetery Ridge, next to Little Round Top, and moves his entire corps approximately 1/2 mile west to the area of the Peach Orchard and Emmitsburg Road, leaving his right flank in the air and unattached to Hancock's Second Corps as ordered by Meade. His rationale was that the area of the Peach Orchard was somewhat 40 feet higher than his assigned position on Cemetery Ridge, affording his artillery guns a better field of fire. He also believes that Meade is punishing him because he was not a West Point grad and a West Point general, and wanted to ensure that he did not achieve glory. At this point, Little Round Top is still undefended, with Sickles' men deployed forward in the area of the wheat field and the Devil's Den. So what is it about Sickles' character that has caused him to repeatedly disobey orders? First, he is a narcissist, overly concerned about how he will look and seeking personal glory above all else. He also believes that he is smarter than the West Point generals and is being punished because he lacks their formal military education. He's overly ambitious and believes that he and he alone can win the battle, a sentiment that he continues to espouse regarding his actions during the battle for the rest of his life, claiming that he is a true hero of Gettysburg. Living to 91 years old, he has a long time to convince everyone that he was the hero and Meade wasn't. Sickles is likely one of the most clearest examples why people of poor character ultimately fail in command, regardless of how well they are liked by their followers. Next slide, we're going to talk about Meade's third without warning moment. Quickly, Sickles' without warning moment becomes Meade's third without warning moment. At 3 p.m., Meade calls a meeting of his Corps commanders. Sickles is the only Corps commander who fails to attend. At 3:30, determined to personally find out how Sickles has deployed, Meade and Warren, his chief engineer, ride south to the Tawnytown Road. On the way, they run into Sickles riding toward them. Meade tells them, "Don't bother to dismount. I hear the sound of enemy guns. Return to your command." As Meade scans the field with his binoculars and sees how Sickles has deployed his corps forward, he is shocked that his orders have been disobeyed. He then confronts Sickles, tells him that his corps is too far out. Sickles counters by saying that his ground is higher than Cemetery Ridge. Meade is stunned, but Sickles apparently does not even understand the blunder that he's committed. Meade actually says, "Hey, if you keep going, about 10 miles that way, South Mountain's even higher than what it is here." He tells Sickles neither the Confederates nor the Union can occupy this land right there. Sickles doesn't understand. At this moment, Longstreet's First Corps begins their attack. Meade is left with few choices and quickly reacts by ordering reinforcements from other parts of the field to shore up Sickles' lines, which are rapidly being obliterated by Longstreet. His quick thinking and decisiveness emphasize his character by highlighting his coolness under pressure and Meade's engineering ability to see a complex situation and quickly assess and deploy alternative solutions. Let's talk about General Warren for a second. We're talking about the start of the fighting of the Union left on July 2nd. This is a good time to introduce General Warren. He's a West Point class of 1850, brilliant student, graduating second in his class, known for his exploration of the Nebraska Territory and Black Hills. He's on the West Point faculty. He was Meade's chief engineer. Today he's known as the hero of Little Round Top. Warren's character includes many attributes that might be considered essential for a successful officer. These attributes will be put to the test as he faces his without warning moment. He's quiet and retiring. He's loved and respected as a leader. He does have a wicked temper, like Meade. He's cleverly profane, like Hancock. He believes in honor, courage, and commitment, and he has initiative and decisiveness. His without warning moment is now 3:52 on July 2nd. Meade has just seen for himself that Sickles has deployed, disobeyed orders, moved his corps into an untenable position, endangering the Union left flank. Warren is with Meade at the intersection of the wheat field and Plum Creek. Meade hears musket fire coming from the direction of the still uncovered Little Round Top and orders Warren to find out what is happening. Warren rides to the top of Little Round Top and finds it's occupied by only a few signalmen. He orders his aides to Devil's Den and tell the Union battery there to fire a single shot into the adjacent woods in order to ascertain the presence of Confederate troops. The cannon shot did its job and disclosed the presence of Confederate troops massed in the woods with a clear line of advance to undefended Little Round Top. This is the view that Warren would have had at the battlefield without the monuments. Warren quickly scribbled a note to General Meade asking him to send a division to Little Round Top. As Warren rode down the hill, he found Sykes' Fifth Corps beginning to reinforce Sickles. Warren asked General Sykes to provide reinforcements to secure Little Round Top, which he immediately orders. Next to Warren rode Colonel O'Rourke and ordered him to move his regiment to Little Round Top. O'Rourke hesitated, saying he needed the permission of General Mead, his brigade commander. Warren responded that there was no time to find Meade and that he would take responsibility, and then gave O'Rourke a direct order to move to the top of Little Round Top. Warren's decisive actions during this without warning moment underscore the strength of his character and earned him the title of the Hero of Little Round Top. Let's talk about Colonel Colville for a second. While all hell's breaking out on Little Round Top, the Peach Orchard, the Devil's Den, and the wheat field, more desperate fighting was taking place further north along Cemetery Ridge. Hancock's Second Corps was about to be overrun by 1,700 soldiers of Wilcox, Alabama Brigade. So let's talk about Colonel William Colville, commander of the 1st Minnesota Regiment, a lesser known yet a critical participant in fighting on July 2nd. Colonel Colville combated the 1st Minnesota Regiment. He was a fierce fighting frontiersman, 33 years old, lawyer, newspaperman, 6'6" giant, and told everyone, including Hancock and General Govan, to call him Uncle Bill, which they did. Colville's character reveals a Union officer was ideally placed at a time and moment that required his rare combination of strengths. He's a man of silent courage. Wounded at the Battle of Glendale in 1862, he walked to the back, refused to leave the battlefield, and then as his men were moving to another location, he grabbed the tail of a horse and walked almost a mile, bleeding from the side. He led from the front, he was calm under pressure, and he took care of his men, and his men loved him. So let's look at his without warning moment. Colville's without warning moment begins at 6:45 p.m. on July 2nd. He's standing with his 262 men left of his 1st Minnesota Regiment. As he looks west, he sees 1,700 Alabamans a mere 300 yards away and moving rapidly in his direction. Not far away, Hancock sees the same thing and realizes that the rest of the Union infantry has already been redeployed to other spots on the field. He knows that unless the Alabamans can be stopped, they will smash the Union defensive line on Cemetery Ridge and likely have a clear path to roll up the entire line. Needing to buy time until additional reinforcements could arrive, Hancock writes to Colville and asks, quote, "Are these all the men you have?" Colville answers, "Yes, sir." Hancock then points toward the charging Confederates and tells Colville, "Charge forward and take those rebel flags." So put yourself in Colville's position. How do you think you would react in a similar situation? There was something in Hancock's voice that led Colville to believe that he was bidding him a final farewell. They both had to know at the time that it was a suicide mission. Without hesitation, Colville turned and personally led the charge, although outnumbered 6-1. Shocked the audacity of the attack, and as the hand-in-hand fighting ensued, the 1st Minnesota was miraculously able to prevent the charging Alabamas from penetrating the Union lines. However, the cost was high, with only 47 of the 262 Minnesota soldiers able to survive the encounter without being killed or wounded. Colville was severely wounded but survived, although ending his time in the Union Army. Now we're going to turn to Culp's Hill and General George Greene. Now that we're going to look at the far right of the Union line, which is Culp's Hill, the eye of the fishhook. While Colville and the 1st Minnesota are making up their heroic charge, we will join General George Greene. He's the oldest general in the Union Army, West Point class of 1823. Men called him Old Pop, brilliant engineer, and he commanded the New York Infantry Brigade. He was known as his character. He was known as a gentleman, strict disciplinarian, gruff mannered, kind heart, highly respected by peers and men, believed in the values of honor, courage, and commitment. Now we're going to look at his without warning moment. Greene's without warning moment begins early on the morning of July 2nd. Greene and his brigade are ordered to, with the rest of Slocum's 12th Corps after being relieved by Sickles on the left flank of the Union line. As he surveys Culp's Hill, Greene meets with his division commander, General John Gary. He tells Gary of his intention to build breastworks. Gary responds that he's opposed to breastwork and believes they are bad for morale and discourage soldiers from leaving the protection to take the fight to the enemy. Greene counters with the example of the entrenchments his brigade built at Chancellorsville, allowing them to repel multiple Confederate attacks. Finally, Gary relents and says he will leave the decision to build breastworks up to each brigade commander. Gregg proceeds to build breastworks, including a controversial transverse breastwork, which also became critical of the defense of Culp's Hill. It was controversial for the men of the brigades who thought it was unnecessary to build this transverse line. At 7 that evening, Meade orders all of Slocum's 12th Corps, with the exception of Greene's brigade, to vacate Culp's Hill to reinforce the charges being made along Cemetery Ridge. This leaves Greene with a single brigade to defend against an entire Confederate division. Throughout the evening and the rest of the night, Confederate attacked multiple times, the fighting from their breastworks. Greene held and eventually pushed the rebels completely off the hill, and they used the transverse line to thwart the final Confederate advance up Culp's Hill. Greene's strength of character allowed him to confidently stand up to Geary and pursue a course of action that ultimately led to repelling multiple Confederate attacks. Had the Confederate attacks been successful, that would have allowed a rebel foothold in the Union rear prior to Pickett's charge on July 3rd. The next slide talk about a quick review. The three-day Battle of Gettysburg had an abundance of examples of character and leadership. Large battles usually do. While putting this presentation together, we considered discussing Buford's holding action on July 1st, Strong Vincent's action coordinating the defense of Low Round Top July 2nd, Joshua Chamberlain 20th May in the far left flank of Little Round Top, and Colonel Frank Haskell rallying Gibbon's men and the Confederates had breached the stone wall during Pickett's charge on July 3rd. General George Meade was a true reluctant hero of Gettysburg. Over the years, his reputation was much maligned, especially by Dan Sickles and Daniel Butterfield. However, through several recently written books, including Without Warning, his reputation has started to improve, and as historians are beginning to appreciate how his character and leadership contributed to Union victory at Gettysburg. Meade never did write his own personal memoirs. He didn't believe in writing about himself. He's a very man that did not have any hubris at all. If nothing else, Meade unquestionably proved at Gettysburg that he effectively dealt with the unexpected, without warning moments through a strength of character. Popularity and charisma are overrated predictors of battlefield success. Subordinates will respond to and follow leaders of character. So the next slide, my question to you is, what is your without warning moment and how did you respond? And we all face these. And it's that time when, again, you don't have time to work on your character when someone yells tsunami and you say, no, I don't want this. You want to go join a workout club so you can work on your running speed. You have to deal with running away from the tsunami with the strength and speed that you have at that moment. And that's how we all respond, everyone, to without warning moment. Now for a little commercial note here. The second book in the trilogy, my Gettysburg trilogy, is coming out in July. It will be out probably July 4th. It's called Thundering Courage, George Armstrong Custer, Union Cavalry Boy Generals, and Justified Defiance at Gettysburg. This book will be interesting because there were 4 officers who did justified defiance. They disobeyed a lawful order. In doing so, one won the Medal of Honor. Custer led one of the most famous cavalry charges in military history, and another general saved the Union right flank. So it's a little bit different story than Without Warning, where Sickles blatantly disobeys an order that almost cost the Union a victory at Gettysburg. And this one here is, when is justified defiance? When do you do that? Last slide is questions.